The Dolphin Hotel, an old, grand structure with Victorian architecture, is located in the heart of a bustling city. It has a long history of mysterious occurrences, with its most infamous room being 1408. The room is located on the 14th floor, isolated at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. The door to room 1408 is heavy, with a tarnished brass number and a sense of foreboding that seems to emanate from the wood itself. Michael Stone had heard the rumors. Everyone had. The Dolphin Hotel was a relic of a bygone era, an imposing structure with creaking floors, peeling wallpaper, and a chilling reputation. But it was room 1408 that held a particular infamy, a room that had witnessed untold horrors, driving its occupants to madness and death. Michael was no stranger to haunted places. He'd written books exposing frauds and delusions, priding himself on his rational mind. Elena Ward, his assistant, was his complete opposite. Where Michael saw logic, Elena saw the supernatural. She believed in ghosts, spirits, and the unknown. This time, they both aimed to confront the myth of room 1408 head-on. Henry Gregory, the hotel manager, met them in the lobby. His face was as aged as the hotel, with deep-set eyes that had seen too much. "I strongly advise you not to stay in room 1408, Gregory said, his voice a grave whisper. "The room is cursed." Michael chuckled, waving off the warning. "We've heard it all before, Mr. Gregory. Just give us the key." Reluctantly, Gregory handed over a heavy, brass key. "Stay for one night, if you must. But be warned, many who enter that room do not leave it whole." Michael and Elena exchanged a glance, a mix of excitement and trepidation. They took the rickety elevator up to the 14th floor, the air growing colder with each floor they ascended. The hallway leading to room 1408 was narrow, the wallpaper dark and faded. Each step echoed ominously. The door to room 1408 loomed ahead, seeming to pulse with a malevolent energy. Michael inserted the key, feeling an icy chill as he turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a room shrouded in shadow. The room was large but oppressive, with an ornate chandelier casting eerie shadows on the walls. The wallpaper was a garish, blood-red pattern that seemed to writhe and move. The furniture was antique, covered in a thick layer of dust. The air was heavy, stifling, filled with an indescribable sense of dread. Elena shivered, her breath visible in the cold air. "This place, it feels wrong." Michael set up his equipment, determined to capture any signs of the paranormal. He positioned cameras, voice recorders, and EMF detectors around the room. As the night deepened, the atmosphere grew increasingly sinister. At midnight, the room came alive. The chandelier swayed without a breeze. The temperature plummeted, and whispers filled the air. Shadows twisted and danced, forming grotesque shapes on the walls. The EMF detectors spiked, and the cameras captured fleeting glimpses of figures moving just out of sight. Elena felt a cold hand brush her neck, and she screamed. Michael turned, seeing nothing but feeling the oppressive presence closing in. The whispers grew louder, forming words in a language neither of them recognized. Suddenly, the room shifted. The walls seemed to close in, the ceiling descended, and the floor buckled. Blood began to seep from the walls, forming puddles on the floor. The chandelier's light flickered, casting grotesque, distorted shadows. A figure emerged from the shadows, a gaunt, hollow-eyed specter with a malevolent grin. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, and the room filled with an ear-piercing shriek. Michael and Elena covered their ears, the sound reverberating through their skulls. The specter advanced, its eyes burning with hatred. Michael stumbled back, his rational mind shattering. Elena tried to move, but her legs were rooted to the spot. The room twisted and warped around them, a nightmare come to life. The specter reached out, its cold, skeletal fingers inches from Michael's throat. Just as it was about to touch him, the room plunged into darkness. The shriek stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Michael and Elena stood frozen, their hearts pounding. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. Then, a single word echoed through the void, spoken in a voice that chilled them to the bone. "Welcome." The lights flickered back on, and the room was empty. The blood was gone. The walls were intact, and the temperature was normal. Michael and Elena were alone, but the sense of dread remained, heavier than ever. They knew they were not alone. The room had welcomed them, and it had no intention of letting them leave. Michael and Elena huddled together in the center of the room, their breaths ragged. The atmosphere was thick with a palpable sense of evil, as if the room itself were alive, watching them, waiting. "We need to leave," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "We need to get out of here now." Michael nodded, but as he turned towards the door, it seemed farther away than before. The room stretched and contracted, its dimensions warping in impossible ways. Michael reached out, his hand trembling, and grasped the doorknob. It was ice-cold and unyielding, refusing to turn. "We're trapped," he muttered, his voice breaking. Suddenly, the walls began to pulse, beating like a grotesque heart. The wallpaper bled anew, dark crimson rivulets streaming down. The whispers returned, louder, more insistent, and the shadows moved with greater purpose, coalescing into grotesque figures that lurked at the edges of their vision. Elena screamed as a figure lunged at her, passing through her like a cold wind but leaving her paralyzed with fear. Michael grabbed her arm, pulling her back to the center of the room, but the specters closed in, their hollow eyes burning with malevolence. Hours seemed to pass, or perhaps it was only minutes. Time had lost all meaning in room 1408. Michael and Elena were exhausted, their minds fraying at the edges. The room played tricks on them, showing them visions of their deepest fears. Michael saw his late wife, her face twisted in agony, accusing him of abandoning her. Elena saw herself trapped in an endless labyrinth, her cries for help echoing back to her in mocking tones. The walls whispered their secrets, taunting them with memories they had tried to forget. In a desperate attempt to break free, Michael smashed the mirror on the wall, hoping to find an escape route. Instead, he found himself staring into a void, a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. From within the void, a hand reached out, clawed and monstrous. He staggered back, clutching his head as the whispers turned into screams. The room was alive with their torment, feeding on their fear and despair. Just when they thought they couldn't endure anymore, the room fell silent. The specters vanished, the blood receded, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, if only slightly. Michael and Elena exchanged a wary glance, knowing that this was merely a reprieve, not salvation. In the center of the room, where there had been nothing before, a book now lay. Its cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. Michael approached it cautiously, sensing that this book held the answers they sought. He opened it, and the words seemed to writhe on the page, written in a language he couldn't understand. But as he stared, the letters rearranged themselves, forming sentences he could read. "The room is a gateway," he read aloud, his voice trembling. "It feeds on the souls of those who enter, trapping them in an eternal cycle of torment." Elena's eyes widened. "We need to destroy it, break the cycle." Michael nodded, but he had no idea how. The room seemed invulnerable, a fortress of nightmares. As they pondered their next move, the temperature dropped again, and a voice, cold and mocking, echoed through the room. "You think you can escape? You are mine." The specters reappeared, their eyes glowing with malevolence. The room began to twist and warp once more, the walls closing in. Desperation gave Michael clarity. He grabbed the book and hurled it into the void that had opened in the mirror. The room shrieked, the walls vibrating with an inhuman wail. The specters recoiled, their forms dissolving into mist. "Go!" Michael shouted, dragging Elena towards the door. This time, the knob turned, and the door swung open to reveal the corridor beyond. They stumbled into the hallway, the door slamming shut behind them. The silence of the corridor was a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. They ran for the elevator, their footsteps echoing loudly. As they descended to the lobby, the normalcy of the hotel felt surreal. They burst out of the elevator, gasping for breath, and found Henry Gregory waiting for them. "You survived," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Not many do." Michael glared at him. "What is that room? Why would you keep it open?" Gregory sighed. Some things cannot be explained or controlled. Room 1408 is one of those things. It exists beyond our understanding, feeding on fear and despair. All we can do is warn people, but curiosity always wins. Michael and Elena left the Dolphin Hotel, the night air cold and fresh against their skin. They walked in silence, the horrors they had witnessed too fresh, too raw to discuss. As they reached the edge of the hotel property, Elena glanced back. The windows of the Dolphin stared back, dark and lifeless, except for one. In the window of room 1408, a light flickered and a shadow moved. Elena shivered, turning away. "We need to warn people," she said, her voice firm. "This can't happen to anyone else." Michael nodded, but deep down, he knew that the room was eternal. It would always find new victims, new souls to torment. Days turned into weeks, and the horrors of room 1408 seemed to linger in Michael and Elena's minds, haunting their thoughts and dreams. They tried to resume their normal lives, but the memory of the room's malevolent presence was inescapable. Michael poured himself into writing, attempting to document their experiences in hopes of warning others. Elena, on the other hand, began researching the history of the Dolphin Hotel and its infamous room, desperate to find a way to end the curse once and for all. Despite their best efforts, they found no concrete answers. The room's origins were shrouded in mystery, with records of its existence stretching back for centuries. It seemed that room 1408 was a fixture of the hotel's dark history, an entity that thrived on fear and suffering. One stormy night, Michael received a call from Elena. Her voice was urgent, filled with a mix of fear and excitement. "I found something," she said. "Meet me at the Dolphin. We need to go back." Michael's heart sank at the thought of returning to that cursed place, but he knew they had to face it once more. Armed with new information and a desperate hope for resolution, they made their way back to the hotel. Henry Gregory met them in the lobby, his expression unreadable. "I knew you'd return," he said quietly. "Be careful." They rode the elevator up to the 14th floor, the air growing colder with each floor they ascended. The hallway was just as they remembered, narrow, dimly lit, and oppressive. The door to room 1408 loomed ahead, a sinister portal to their nightmares. Elena took a deep breath and produced an ancient-looking amulet. "This is supposed to be a talisman, a protective charm. I don't know if it will work, but it's worth a try." Michael nodded, gripping a flashlight tightly. They entered the room, the familiar sense of dread washing over them. The room was unchanged, still as sinister and foreboding as ever. As they stepped inside, the room reacted immediately. The temperature plummeted, and the chandelier began to sway. The whispers returned, louder and more menacing than before. Shadows twisted and writhed, forming grotesque shapes that reached out with clawed hands. Elena held the amulet high, chanting a prayer she had found in an ancient text. The room's atmosphere crackled with energy, the shadows recoiling from the talisman's glow. The whispers turned to screams, and the room seemed to pulse with anger. A figure emerged from the darkness, more defined and terrifying than before. Its hollow eyes burned with rage as it advanced on them. Michael stepped forward, trying to shield Elena, but the specter reached through him, its touch freezing his very soul. Elena's chanting grew louder, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. The amulet glowed brighter, and the room began to shake violently. The walls bled, and the floor cracked open, revealing a chasm of darkness beneath. "Leave this place," Elena screamed, her voice echoing with power. "You have no hold here." The specter shrieked, a sound of pure agony and fury. It reached for Elena, but the amulet's light intensified, engulfing the room in a blinding radiance. The specter's form disintegrated, dissolving into nothingness with one final, despairing wail. The light faded, and the room fell silent. The blood receded, the shadows vanished, and the air grew warm once more. Michael and Elena stood in the center of room 1408, breathing heavily, their hearts pounding. "Did it work?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse. Elena nodded, tears of relief streaming down her face. "I think so. I think it's over." They left the room, the door closing behind them with a finality that felt reassuring. As they made their way back to the lobby, they felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Henry Gregory met them at the elevator, his expression one of cautious hope. "Is it done?" Michael nodded. "We think so." The room, it felt different. Gregory sighed, a hint of a smile on his lips. Perhaps now the dolphin can finally rest. In the days that followed, Michael and Elena continued their research, ensuring that the curse of room 1408 was truly broken. The Dolphin Hotel began to shed its dark reputation, attracting new guests and regaining some of its former glory. Michael published his book, detailing their harrowing experiences and the final confrontation with the malevolent entity. It became a bestseller, capturing the imagination of readers worldwide. Elena continued her work, delving into the mysteries of the supernatural with a newfound sense of purpose. Yet, despite their victory, a part of them remained vigilant. They knew that evil could never be completely vanquished, only kept at bay. And though room 1408 was now silent, the world was still filled with dark places, waiting for the unwary to stumble into their clutches. As they moved forward, Michael and Elena carried the scars of their encounter, a reminder of the thin veil between the known and the unknown, and the horrors that lurked just beyond.